On today's video, I'll be crafting with Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards, turning them into some beautiful decor pieces for your home. So let's get crafting. So I headed to Dollar Tree and grabbed a handful of their bamboo cutting boards. You'll usually find these in the kitchen supply aisle, and I really love the quality of these. I'll be making a riser for this project, and I'll be using a cutting board, and I'm going to paint it using this chalk paint from Waverly in the shade Sandstone. I really wanted to paint it a nice neutral color, so I thought this was perfect. So I'm applying the paint with a brush, and this color really does go on nicely. I do about a couple coats, but really one was probably more than enough because I do end up distressing it a bit. I also turn it over and paint the other side, which will be the bottom. It's completely optional, but I wanted to give it a nice finished look. So once that's completely dried, I take a sanding sheet and I give it a light sanding. Definitely along the edges and on random areas on the top surface. I also switch to a coarser grit sandpaper to make it look a little more scratchy. And I just continue sanding until I like the way it looks. Now I wanted to stencil in a floral pattern on top of the wood, so I just decided to cut a stencil out with my Cricut. And what I did was go on Canva and downloaded a pattern that I liked, and then I uploaded it to Cricut Design Space, and that's usually how I like to customize my stencils. But you know, there are so many other options. Dollar Tree does have a handful of stencils or rub-on transfers or even decorative decals that you can use instead. So once my stencil is ready to go, I just use some Dollar Tree transfer tape to place the stencil vinyl on the wood. I place that on one end all the way to the edge, and I'll be using white acrylic paint from Apple Barrel over the stencil. So after I dip my brush on the paint, I dab out the excess before passing it over the stencil. It's always best to apply it in light layers to prevent any smudging. Of course, the sticky vinyl also helps. Now, I don't want the stencil to go on too bold or opaque. I want it to look a little faded, so I do apply it lightly in some areas and a little darker in others. And then I carefully peel it out and I move it over to the other side. So I do the same thing, adding paint to my brush, dabbing out the excess, and then pouncing it over the stencil. It's such a beautiful floral pattern. For the legs, I'll be using these wood peg dolls. These are from Hobby Lobby. They came in a pack of 8, and they were quite inexpensive for the pack. To contrast the top, I'm just going to stain it with this gel stain, and I'm just wiping it or brushing it on and then wiping it down. And then I turn it over and glue the legs on the corners. I really like how the wood stain looks against the sandstone floral top. I let it dry completely and then I seal it. I'll be using some clear wax from Waverly. So I apply that with a wax paintbrush all over the top surface as well as the legs. Now I always like to let things that I stencil dry overnight before I apply the wax just to make sure nothing gets smudged. And once the wax has completely dry, I do buff it down just a bit. With wax, the more that you buff, the more sheen you'll get. And this beautiful riser is done. For this project, I'll be making a beautiful wall hook, and I'll be using 2 of Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards and this decorative metallic wall hook from Dollar Tree. These come with 2 black screws, which you will find on the back. It's very pretty, shabby chic, and lightly distressed. I'm going to glue the 2 boards together so that it's one thick piece. So I apply some Tite Bond Quick and Thick multi-surface glue on one of the boards, and then I place the other board on top. I make sure the sides are flush and then I clamp it and let it dry completely before the next step. And I just left that alone overnight. Once it's completely dry, you'll have a really nice solid piece of bamboo wood. And this feels really nice and sturdy. Next, I'm going to place the metallic hook right on top. And I position it where I want it to be placed. There's 2 holes where the screws go in, and so I mark it, and then before I add the screws, I drill in some pilot holes. I just wrapped a piece of tape on the bit so I know how far to drill. The bamboo is quite dense, so this will help make it easier to get those screws in. Since the hook is white, I wanted the screws to blend, so I just dab on a little bit of white paint over the screws to blend it. I'll be placing a couple triangle hangers on the back. Well, you can just use one and position it in the top center. I'm going to be placing 2 on this one. To make sure the triangle hangers are placed evenly, I'll be using this carpenter square to mark precisely. So I turn the hook over with the top part down, and I line the corner with a ruler, and I mark the inner right angle corner. And I mark it on both sides where I'm going to screw in the nails. And this beautiful, modern, and vintage wooden metallic wall hook is done. Whether you use it to hang things on or as a decorative accent for your home, this simple project really turned out beautiful. For this DIY, you're going to need one bamboo cutting board from Dollar Tree and a couple 12-inch 1x2s, which you can find in the Dollar Tree wood section. I'm going to be making a hanging wooden wall pocket. I'm going to measure the height and I mark where I want to trim it. So for this, I'm trimming so that I have two at about 7 3/4 of an inch and one at 4 inches for that bottom horizontal section. So here they are, trimmed and ready to go. And I just use a miter box and saw. Dollar Tree wood is really easy to cut through. I'll be painting the wood with this chalk paint from Waverly in the shade Sandstone. So I'm just taking note of the areas where I'll be applying the glue, and I make sure to avoid painting those areas. I'll also be painting a small section on the front of the bamboo, so I tape about 2 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, also making sure to tape off the sides. And I'm just making sure that there's no bubbles. I'm just pushing down on the tape because I don't want any of that paint getting underneath. Because I want full coverage, I'll be applying the paint with a round sponge brush. For the first layer, I start by brushing or dragging the sponge brush downward away from the tape. After that, I just start pouncing the brush all over, still being extra careful around that taped area, applying light coats, and just pouncing very lightly as well. So far no streaks, and it's going on evenly. I also make sure to paint the sides. Once that's completely painted, I carefully remove the tape, and thank goodness the paint didn't bleed through. To assemble, I flip the board over and then I apply some glue. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick, and I apply that on the narrow, unpainted sides of the trimmed 1x2s. And then I just attach them onto the board. Now to make sure they dry equally spaced, I take the extra 4-inch cut wood and I place that towards the center. And then I just attach the rest of the 1x2s so that it forms a U shape. I do clamp them together and I let that dry completely. To seal, I took it outside and I used a spray sealer from Krylon. To hang, I'll be attaching a couple triangle hangers using a ruler to make sure they're placed evenly. And that's it for this one. You can place some flowers or greenery stems. You can also make a matching pair. I really loved how this turned out. For this DIY, I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards, and I'm going to be adding some stenciling on top, and I'll be using one that I got at Walmart. They have some really nice, inexpensive stencil options. I'll be using this one with a decorative circle. So I place the stencil towards the top, centering it, and I'm just securing it in place with some masking tape. I'm also covering up any areas close to the circle. For paint, I'm using Apple Barrel's white, but you can definitely use any color you prefer. I definitely considered black or even a neutral color. So I'm just pouncing over the stencil with a stencil brush, and I just go over it a couple times, and after that, I carefully remove the stencil. I wanted to add some wording in the center, and since this is going to be a little cookbook, tablet, or phone stand for the kitchen, I thought I would stencil in the word recipe in the center. And I just cut a stencil out on my Cricut using a Dollar Tree vinyl. But you can definitely customize it and put any word or phrase that will fit. So here's how it's looking so far. I like it. It's very clean and simple. I'll be using this 1x2-inch wood from Dollar Tree from a previous project, as well as a paint stir stick. I'll be trimming both to the width of the board, so about 6 inches. To match the stenciling, I'll be painting the wood white, but before I do that, to make it easier, I glue the 1x2 and the paint stick together. I just apply some glue on one narrow side of the 1x2 and I attach the paint stick to it like so. And I clamp it a bit to give the paint some time to dry. Next, I'll be attaching a Dollar Tree easel on the back of the board. So I apply some Titebond multi-purpose glue on the easel, and then I attach that to the back of the board, making sure they're both flush on the bottom. Next, I stand it up and then I pull the easel stand back, which will reposition the easel. It lifts it up just a bit so that the board rests or leans nicely on it. And you can clamp it to make sure it bonds nicely. Then I go ahead and paint the glued wood pieces white, and I make sure to leave the narrow side unpainted. Then I apply some glue on that unpainted side and I attach that towards the bottom of the board. And finally, to seal it, you can definitely use your preferred sealer. For this one, I'm using a spray sealer from Krylon. It definitely makes an adorable, customizable gift. And I think this turned out so beautiful and simple. This final project is going to be a quick one. I'll be using one Dollar Tree bamboo cutting board, this 1/2-inch leather strip from Michaels, and some of these metal thumbtacks from Dollar Tree. I will be making a little tray, and I'll be trimming the leather strips to make candles. Now this was about $3 for a yard with a 50% off coupon from Michaels, so I thought that was a pretty good deal. And I'm cutting out tube to about a little over 7 inches. It really depends on how large you want the handles to be. To glue, I'll be using Titebond's Quick and Thick multi-purpose glue. This is definitely my favorite versatile glue. It bonds strongly and it dries pretty quickly. So I'm going to apply some glue on one end of a leather strip, and then I attach that on one side of the board. I hold it down with some tape so that I can work on the other end of the strip. So I do the same thing on the other end of the board, applying glue on the ends of a leather strip and attaching it to the side of the board. Now I do hold it for about a minute or so to give that glue a little time to bond before reaching for the tape, but you definitely want to have that tape cut and ready to go just to prevent that strip from popping out, because it did pop out on me several times. Once that's completely dry, I'll be attaching the metal tacks. So I start by poking on the leather to mark where I want to place the tack, and then I just lightly hammer it in place. I also place a little piece of tape on top of the tack to keep it from getting dented from the hammering. So I do that on all sides, and this will reinforce that leather in place even more. You can also keep the handles the way it is, or you can even flip it so that it's pointing away from the tray. Now if you prefer a thicker tray, you can double up the bamboo board before attaching the handles, just like in the previous DIY. So there you go, 5 quick and simple DIYs using Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards. If you like this video and want to see more projects like these, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now make sure to check out this next video because I think you're really going to like it. Until next time, bye!